Could be under space open too. Sometimes.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the November 3rd, 2022, 9 a.m. regular meeting of the Sunset Beach Planning Board here in Council Chambers. Seeing that we have a quorum of the Planning Board and we welcome our guests. It's great to have guests. Usually we talk to empty chairs, so thanks for coming and participating. We will start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. To all stand. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Thank you. At the start of each planning board meeting, we have a statement that we read aloud, and each member of the planning board responds to it. It has to do with conflict of interest. Does any member of the planning board have a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest with regard to any item on the agenda? And if so, please state so at this time. Richard?
No.
Ron?
No.
Jerry?
I do not.
Sybil?
No.
Okay. We've run out of planning board members. As chair, I do not have a conflict. We have an agenda, a draft agenda before us. The town staff has prepared. Does anyone on the planning board wish to amend the agenda? And if they do not, we would like a motion to approve it.
I so move.
Second.
So move to approve the draft agenda, seconded by Ron. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved. The next item is public comments on agenda items only. And again, welcome to our citizens, visitors, participants. It's great to see people here and taking an interest in what we do. I have received several emails, numerous emails, as the rest of town staff, other members of town staff and the planning board regarding some items on the agenda today. And regarding also some items that are not on the agenda today. During public comments, which will start in a second here, there's a 3-minute time limit maximum. There will be no deliberation back and forth between the speaker and the planning board members. We will not respond to we will take note of your concerns and your statements, but we will not respond to them. Most of the emails that I've received have been regarding Jaguar's Lair, Ocean Ridge Plantations, original section 1 and 2, which were approved many years ago. That is not on the agenda for today, so your comments regarding Jaguar's Lair and Ocean Ridge Plantation would need to be limited to what's before us today in a preliminary plat, which is sections 2D, 3 through 8, which they call section 6, I believe, or phase 6, I believe. And then the other item on the agenda is our Pelican Reserve preliminary plat review and discussion. So we will open up the 3-minute discussions or comments from the public. Sir, in the back, you had your hand up first. Please list your name and address at the start of your comments, please.
Good morning. Good morning, folks. I'm Steve Strini, and I'm at 7645 High Market Street, right across the street over here. So I would like to speak as a taxpayer and express opinion on today's agenda topics. At a recent town council meeting, a member boasted that the town council decision to purchase property on the island will save us from having 22 new homes built. I had a chuckle to myself after hearing that, because today you're going to be reviewing plans to hypothetically approve 1,200 new homes to be built. Now, I don't know all of the zoning rules and regulations, but you have been spending countless hours on rewriting these, and hats off to you and your work on this. No current town officials are to blame for this culture of massive development, but I think there was an opportunity here to tighten things up, to lessen the impact on everything that is involved with development for our community. But it seems like towns bend over backwards to accommodate developers, and it would be refreshing if the town of Sunset Beach did not follow suit. I am no tree hugger, but there seems to be zero environmental concerns with development. Clear cutting takes place, choking smoke for weeks or months with the burning of debris will happen, and the displacement of wildlife is never considered along with the destroyed wetlands. It makes me laugh when the town makes note of Arbor Day or some other event when 10 trees are planted somewhere and then developers are approved by the planning department to clear cut basically everything in sight. So 1,200 more homes means 1,200 more driveways, 1,200 more gutter systems, and the accompanied sidewalks and roads, all aiding to funnel water quicker to burden area waterways. I think planning should have insisted on larger lots and subdivisions to help ease all of these concerns and not to cave to pressure from developers to cram as many lots in as possible. Our town does not need to encourage giant, crazy subdivisions to create tax revenue. We seem to be flush with cash, which is a great thing. Everybody knows these 1,200 homes will be approved, and along with the surrounding giant tracts of land to be built in the area. Most of these homeowners will visit our beach island. Everyone says Sunset Beach has the best beach in the area. Too bad the secret will be out and our quaint area will be overburdened forever. I believe our town officials could have helped slow things down, but I think it's probably too late. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, in the front row. Name and address, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am Eric Edgerton. I live at 459 Ocean Ridge Parkway in Ocean Ridge. I'm here to urge the board not to approve the new plan for the redesign of Jaguar's Lair Section 2D to 8 until certain conditions are met. In 2007, the developer opened Jaguar's Lair for sale of lots, and the infrastructure and development was covered under performance bonds. The infrastructure was not in place with the original 5-year time period. Rather than call the bonds, as Brunswick County did, the town of Sunset Beach and the developer reached a tolling agreement on May 1st, 2012 to complete certain infrastructure in phases 1, 2A, and 2B.
Sir, I know you're trying to give us history and that's helpful, but please.
I'll get to the points, please. 10.5 years later, the infrastructure is sufficient to grant lot owners building permits in 2A, 2B, and 2C has not been completed. I respectfully ask that no consideration be given to the request to redesign the remaining portions of Section 2D and 8 until the required infrastructure is in place for 2A, 2B, and 2C inspected and approved. A little history here. The developer has planned amenities in 2005 for Phase 4 Leopard's Chase, tennis courts, pools, change houses, complex. 2007, Phase 5 for Waterbrook Woods. It was a spa, which went into foreclosure before it was being built.
Sir, again, the history is helpful, but can you limit it to our
Yes, sir.
item on the
I'll
agenda?
get to that second page. Original Phase 6 had amenities including a golf course, canoe pond, tennis complex, and a major amenity center. None were in Phase 1 and Phase 2. These are now proposed to be replaced with smaller community centers. Because of the 10-year failure of the developer to complete infrastructure, I ask that the additional provisions be made by the town of Sunset Beach before the sales in lots 2D to 8 are allowed. Infrastructure for 2A, B, and C be completed and full compliance approved. Then for the sections 2D to 8, required infrastructure including roads, sewer, water, and electricity for the new section need to be inspected for full compliance and approved. B, that the amenity centers for each area be defined, approved, and completed and fully functional. Note that the roads in these sections are turned over to the HOA upon completion and before the homes are constructed. C, that the old Angels Trace golf course building be demolished and removed. The current building is collapsing after 15 years of neglect. This is a safety magnet hazard for anyone going on the property, especially young children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And in order to get to that last part, I had to give you a little history.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Art.
Appreciate your comments. Ma'am, you had your hand up. Morning.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to address you this morning. My name is Carol Dunham.
Pull the mic a little closer to you. Thank
Like
you.
that? Okay. My name is Carol Dunham. I live at 537 Gladstone Circle in Ocean Ridge. I am the president of the Ocean Ridge Master Association, which is the homeowners association for those properties in Jaguar's Lair, which were originally platted and potentially for those properties that are on the agenda this morning. I'm also here with the vice president and the secretary of our association. The town of Sunset Beach was granted extraterritorial jurisdiction over the area called Jaguar's Lair many, many years ago. That authority came with responsibility, as outlined in your Unified Development Ordinance. Unfortunately, the town has not met its responsibility or its commitment on behalf of those property owners in Jaguar's Lair. Most of the 200 plus properties that were originally purchased in 2006 and 2007, these folks invested in a future community, trusting that they would be able to build their upscale homes with golf course views and first-class amenities. Today, you're considering changes to the Jaguar's Lair community. The plan under review this morning eliminates the golf course and adds over 1,000 units of high-density residential units. I asked the town, why would you consider a new plan when the first plan from so many years ago hasn't been completed? The town was responsible to property owners and has not followed through on those responsibilities. In 2006, the town revised its UDO to include the following statement: no subdivision or planned residential development shall be recorded, nor any structural building permit be issued within a proposed subdivision until all the town requirements have been met and all required infrastructure has been installed and approved by the appropriate town officials. And then once upon determination that these standards have been achieved, the planning board, you, shall grant final plat approval of the subdivision and inform the town council of this action. Please table this request this morning until all the infrastructure has been installed and approved by the appropriate town officials for the more than 200 lots that were platted and sold more than 15 years ago in Jaguar's Lair. The town let these property owners down. Now they have lost their golf course and they have no amenities. Now is the time for the town to do the right thing to fix this 15-year-old problem. Please set a requirement for the completed infrastructure to be approved by town officials as a condition for placing this plan on the agenda for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate everybody has so far stayed within the 3 minutes, so thank you very much. More comments? Not seeing any? Oh. Okay. Would they need to come in here and speak? We finished with public comments from the people that are participating in the main room. If anybody has any, you might want to line up in the hallway. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Phil
Good morning,
Piro, 6353 Blenheim Place, Ocean Isle. I'm a member of the community at Ocean Ridge Plantation, and I just wanted to say that I understand the board's the need for a developer to develop his property, and I understand you're under constraints to allow a developer to do certain things under law. But I got to say, you're looking at a project with over 1,000 homes at 7,500 square feet of lots, and these lots in no way reflect the Ocean Ridge properties of 14 to 17 to 18,000 square feet. The size of the homes will be different. The density will be different. There'll be so many more people. It'll burden the community. These are currently unplatted lots. We have 1,600 homes which is about 3,200 people for our amenities. We're in the amenity business now because our developer failed to meet his obligations in our community. We've taken on that burden. We're building amenities so we can support the 1,600 homes we currently have. There's no way if this application is approved that an additional 1,000 or 1,200 homes or 2,400 people can utilize the amenities that now we're in the business of building. This developer has not ever come through with his promises. It's been something that just keeps happening time and time again. It's time for this board to put their foot down and say, enough with you as developer, you can't do that. But I would say for this specific project, if this has to go because of a legal issue with developers or your obligation as a board, I would ask that the developers subdivide this property and subdivide it so that it's not part of Ocean Ridge Plantation, so that they don't have an obligation to use our amenities and HOAs. So I would say that if the board said we have to approve it, make him subdivide the property and let him, if you need the tax revenue, that's fine with me. Take the tax revenue, give him his developer's rights, but subdivide it from Ocean Ridge Plantation. I don't believe it should be part of our community. It's not part of it. It doesn't look like it, and I'm against it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have like 15 years of history here, but I can't do any better than what Carol and Eric and Phil just said.
Name and address, please, ma'am.
Penny Von Bergen, Wessel, 6581 Willowbank Place,
Thank you.
Ocean Ridge Plantation. So I just have one question, and I know there's no back and forth. So I just want to ask this question. I'm sure somebody will get back to me at some time. July 20th, 2011, there was a hearing before the County Board of Equalization and Review. Coastal communities argued at that time to have the evaluation on the Angels Trace Golf Course lowered by about 80%. At that time, at that hearing, the attorney, Elaine Jordan for Coastal, said that there was a binding agreement that the land not be used for anything other than a golf course. Now, obviously, that couldn't have been with the county because they were appearing before the county. So I was wondering if you know, and I hope you'll get back to me, with whom the binding agreement was that Angels Trace should be used for nothing but a golf course. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning.
The only thing I gotta say is
Name and address, please, sir.
I'm sorry.
No, you're
Thomas Tooley. I am a lot owner at Jaguars, and I also own a house on 594 Westchester in Ocean Ridge. The only thing I can say is I disagree with the gentleman that subdivided, because when people bought those lots, myself, we were promised to be part of Ocean Ridge. So to subdivide it, I think is totally wrong. People bought those lots thinking they were going to have the retirement dream and got screwed over, plain English. I think that the plan should stand the way it originally was made to be, not add 1,000 homes. Again, the people that bought in there for the retirement dreams got screwed over. You're going to allow 1,000 more homes go in there and let it happen again. You think he's going to do what he says he's going to do in past history? Just look at history, you know? So you're going to let him go ahead and screw over 1,000 people again. It's not right. It's not conscionable. It's not right. And it's your power to stop it from happening. And that's basically all I have to say. I just would hope that you would think with your minds and your heart and say it's not the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Thomas.
Fred.
Fred Thorne, 272 Brookshire Place, Ocean Ridge Plantation. Also had a live-work townhome here on Queen Anne Street up until April when I sold it. Been a resident of Ocean Ridge for 23 years. I've seen many of the developers' communities be sold off, never completed original plans that people's dreamed on having their home in. Lots in Jaguar's Lair were selling from anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000. Today, I've seen lots. I'm also a realtor, so I watch this stuff. I see lots selling for $2,500. Back to the developer.
Mr. Thor, could you please, as we've
Yes.
stated before, keep
Okay.
your items focused on the sections at hand today?
It's the sections. Okay. What I envision is the reason the developer is trying to subdivide or break up this tract into smaller lots. His plan is to eventually sell that off. And if he has your approval and everything's in place, that land will be sold. It will not be developed by the current developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Joe, anybody else in the hallway? Okay. Last chance at public comments. Lloyd?
Lloyd Schaefer. I live in Ocean Ridge, 6461 Kirkwall Point. And I'd like to say that I'm not an attorney like Penny, who just spoke. I'm not a realtor like Fred, who just spoke. But we've been in Ocean Ridge as full-time residents of the main campus for 7 years now. And every year we read more and more in the Brunswick Beacon about how residents of the county are being asked to cut back on water, only water on certain days, certain hours. Now, I moved here from California, and we were used to that out there. It's rather unnerving to have that happen every year here on an increasing basis. Electricity, same way. Trash will be adversely affected, as will the number of cars on the road with this addition. And the infrastructure here will be severely tested. Now, to another point, we have been sadly disappointed by what we thought was going to happen at Ocean Ridge with regard to some things that had been put in advertisements and brochures and has never happened. You have been burned at Sunset Beach with non-performance by this group of developers, Coastal. My question to you, gentlemen and ladies, is why in the hell would you want to do business with this guy again? Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Last chance. All right, public comments period is closed. The first item of business on the planning board agenda for this regular meeting is the approval. We have two sets of previous planning board regular meetings. We have one on August 4th and one on October 6th. The August 4th minutes have come before us before, and we had all agreed on a revision that we all felt was unanimously needed. That has been added or amended by Katie. I think it meets what we were looking for. Any discussion from planning board on the August 4th meeting minutes?
As the one who raised the concerns over that issue, you've done a great job in including that in the minutes, so I so move that we adopt the revised minutes for the August 4th meeting.
And second on that?
I second it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 The August 4th meeting minutes approved. Thank you, Katie. The next one is the October 6th regular meeting of the planning board. And I did not find any cause for comment or changes. Any other member of the planning board feel differently?
I move that we accept these as written.
Can we have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Katie, thank you. Both minutes have been approved for publication and for signature. All right, under new business, the first item for new business is the Jaguar's Lair preliminary plat for sections 2D and sections 3 through 8. Chad, do you have any comments to open up our discussion on that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board, good morning. Before you today, you have an application and preliminary plat subdivision submittal on behalf of Coastal Companies at Ocean Ridge. LLC is the owner and the applicant is requesting a preliminary plat approval for Ocean Ridge Plantation, Jaguar's Lair. This preliminary plat is for 1,034 single-family lots. The subject property is currently located off the Old Georgetown Road Southwest, approximately half a mile from the intersection of NC 179 and NC 904. The subject property is approximately 395.97 acres in size and is currently zoned MR3 and may be further identified by the 11 parcels that are below it. Staff has reviewed and approved the final plat to be reviewed by the planning board for final approval. This is a by right project. I wanted to remind everybody of this. Attached to staff's comments and review on the preliminary plat prior to issuance of a zoning permit. The preliminary plat must be approved by the planning board in accordance with section 13.02 in the UDO. Subsequent to staff's approval and approval by the planning board in accordance with 13.02, planning staff has also been in contact with North Carolina Department of Transportation and NCDEQ regarding additional outside agency permits that must be obtained prior to work commencing. NCDEQ has requested a state stormwater permit, which is pretty standard. Also, NCDOT is required the project to provide a traffic impact analysis to them on approval as well. Based on staff's review, the proposed site plan meets the standards of the UDO, and since the attachments are in there along with my comments, the preliminary plat, total site plan, the application, and we also have before you today for me to be available for questions. The applicant is here to answer any questions, and I also have the town administrator, Lisa England, and our town attorney, Mr. Grady Richardson. So,
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chad.
sir.
Appreciate it. Our planning director made the comment that this is before us under a by right category. And so for the clarity of people watching on YouTube and the audience, that means that the applicant is proposing all of these fall within our existing UDO ordinances, and they're not asking for any special use permits or anything special be considered by the planning board. I have several questions regarding the application, so I guess I'll just start if that works for everyone. I have a question for Chad, our planning director, and it's really for the edification of the audience and for my edification. The planning board, this planning board, back in 2021, approved a change in our MR3 zoning district, and this application here involves solely within our MR3 zoning district, where we changed the lot sizes, the minimum lot sizes, from 7,500 square feet to 10,000 square feet. We also changed the setbacks for the primary and accessory structures with a required minimum setback from the property line.
Pete, could I just intercede here? An MR3 district is a multi-family district that can be used for multifamily or single family. And we casually refer to it as an acronym. As someone that's acronym impaired, I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Richard.
Sorry, Pete.
And what that multifamilies can only be used in MR3 or approved in MR3 with a special use permit. They are not by right.
Yeah.
Single-family residents are by right. But a question I have for Chad, because it's been asked of me by several citizens. What's before us right now goes back to the old UDO lot size requirements. And I posed the question to Chad for public presentation as to what the applicant at that time did, in fact, prior to town council approving our lot size increase. What did they do as a placeholder, if you will, to preserve their right to put in smaller lots?
Yes, sir. So the change in density change in the MR3 from 7,500 square feet minimum lot size to 10,000 square feet minimum lot size was changed by the town council and adopted on May the 3rd, 2021. The application submittal for this project was submitted on April 30th, 2021. So therefore it is governed, and the applicant does have permit choice under the old UDO provisions.
But why is that? I understand what happened. Our provisions in 13.01C means if they had received approval in May of 2021, they only had 1 year to do something, and that approval would have expired. And then under our plan,
Great point, Ron, because that's my next point.
on our
Thank
planned
you.
residential development. So in 1314, where we're specific on that, and the lawyer may be able to tell us what, because it's not in the other one. The developer shall cure any identified deficiencies within 180 days of notice of the same. So what I'm seeing here, or what you're saying, is because we don't have the 180-day limit on the application cure of deficiencies that were noted in April of 2021, that application stays out there indefinitely. There is no spoilage date. What we're saying is that because he got the original win on 4/30 before 5/3 adoption of the changes, that they have an infinite amount of time. There is no spoilage date inferred in our code of a year that would make the application terminate or spoil and be invalid, so that they need to submit a new application. That's my concern. Clearly, that's the key issue, because if the application is considered legally still valid, and it's valid forever then, because there is no specific spoilage date, they could have waited 20 years to put the final one in, to do this again. I mean, their drawings were done in June or July of 2021, and now we're getting it now. So I would say it's well past the year from the initial application for us to get it. So
I'm going to answer part of your question, is that this is not a PRD.
I know that. I
Okay.
see that. And we in that section, so maybe for our other special meetings, note that we need that time fence be put in the future code, so we don't run into this again, that there's some time fence that they have to get their application cured to stay valid. But we do say that it's only, if we had given them approval in May of 2021, they would have only had a year to do something, and it's now would have been terminated. So we don't have that inferred authority on the application.
So I'm going to make sure I understand your question. The application was submitted April 30th of 2021. Your first question had to do, as I recall, from you asking about a 1 year time period. Understand, I'm coming into this a little bit cold, not having the UDO committed to memory. So I need to understand what your question is better so I can answer it as best I can.
My question is, how long is the application good with no action being taken on it?
So, all right, so backing it up, when the application was submitted, it was entitled to the rules of the game at that juncture. Now, we had this thing called the COVID pandemic. I am almost certain, and we can certainly invite Ms. Jordan up here to give her recollection of it if you wish, but I am fairly certain that Governor Cooper passed various executive actions that extended developmental requirements for action. And I don't know, maybe Chad knows better than I, but if someone had a permit approval that would have expired, they got the benefit of it getting extended out based upon COVID and pandemic stuff. I don't know if that may have had something to do with it. I don't know that submitting an application, what I heard as a second sort of question was, by when must they take action to implement the application by going forward with a preliminary plat approval? To my knowledge, there's nothing in the UDO that requires them, once they submit the application, to move it forward for review and approval by a certain specified amount of time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Clearly, that's something that we should look at shoring up. And I don't agree that they could just sit on it and wait for 20 years.
Well, that's the key question.
I
Because
understand.
the current application doesn't meet the current UDO, but it does meet the UDO that was in effect prior to May 3rd of 2021.
That's correct. And so the question,
So the question is the application valid today or not?
well, I think the question is, when the application was submitted, were there any executive orders by Governor Cooper that extended out time by which you had to move on an application, time by which you had a permit that was set to expire would get extended? I simply don't know the answer to that question as we sit here today.
It seemed to me that then the aegis needs to be on the developer. I mean, if such an executive order exists, fine.
Well, yes and no.
Show us the evidence of that executive order as it impacts. Because right now, based on what I hear from Ron, they're outside of the 1-year application that is in the current UDO.
No, it's not in the current UDO.
It's not.
Exactly.
That's the key.
If we would have reviewed it and approved it, the 1-year fence started.
Okay.
In the preliminary plat, it's not specifically addressing the application.
Okay.
In the PRDs, it does give
Right.
them 180 days.
Okay.
So there's that. Do we infer that the same 1 year occurs on any activity or not? That's a legal question to be
Right.
sorted out.
Well, I think Richard has a point too that I'd like to hear from the applicant, their position on that, so we can. It's obvious that our UDO that was in effect back in May of 2021 did not directly address it, and that was an application only. We'll call it a placeholder. This is the plat that's coming before us now.
Sorry, Pete. And I want to share with the group here. This planning board sits at the beginning of the month to review plat applications like we're doing today. On the third Thursday of every month, we are in the process of rewriting the UDO. Okay? And a lot of what sets the rules for what a planning board can do is going to be in that new UDO. It is a boring, plodding process. But if you want to know why, we're in the position that we're in today, where we don't really know if we have the tools to do what I think everybody wants to do. It's going to be done in the UDO. And those considerations are done on the third Thursday of every month, 9 o'clock. And we usually do this in an empty room. And it is probably the most impactful thing that's going to happen to Sunset Beach over the next 10 years. So sorry for my little soapbox, but I think that's an important consideration for the good citizens here to understand. Thank you.
I think the terminology is very important, and we don't want to be tripped up or confused at the board level or in the citizen level. The town, we as the town staff, are referring to this on an agenda item as the Jaguar's Lair preliminary plat. There's been some conversations, and I'm not deliberating with the speakers earlier on their comments, about inclusion into the existing Ocean Ridge Plantation family for amenities and the like. I'm not going there because that's outside the purview of the town anyway. That's an HOA issue. But we refer to it as Jaguar's Lair, but nowhere on the application, unless I've missed it, do we talk about Jaguar's Lair. It's known as Ocean Ridge Plantation Phase 6. And just for the record, I'm going to try not to refer to this as Jaguar's Lair.
Yes, I think that's a good
because
idea.
It confuses the issues at hand and what's included and what is not included. So Grady, I guess you really don't have a specific answer to Ron's question, except the fact that it could be likely that the governor during pandemic gave latitudes to timelines.
So what I would say is the issue is one that I'm interested in as to whether or not, in the absence of any explicit provision, and that's the thing, because you're going to hear it from the other side, try to look at both lenses. The UDO, I think Chad would agree, does not contain a time deadline, the old one, by which the applicant should move forward on submitting their preliminary plat for approval. So that's what they're going to argue at the outset. The second argument you're going to hear is probably something regarding the pandemic, whether it's Governor Cooper's executive actions to extend things or force majeure, acts of God causing the delay, and anything else they might come up with. The thing I cannot answer for you is what case law might say in the absence of a UDO provision not specifying by when an applicant must move forward on their application to get the benefit of the old rules, if there's any sort of a time constraint that is implied by case law or common law by which they must act. I don't know the answer to that. The only way to get you that answer would be to perform legal research, which I'm happy to do, on Westlaw, Lexis, and any other search engine to try and see if there is case law out there that's ever addressed this specific issue. I'd also put in perspective, because I know that the other side would argue as well, and I say other side, the developer would say, well, even under Ron's mentioning of a 1 year, at the end of the day, they're 5 months and a few days beyond that 1 year. So best case scenario, they would say, we're not that far outside of the 1 year window for 1,034 lots. That's what they'll say. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it legal. I'm trying to deal with both sides of the equation here. But from my standpoint, if you're looking for an answer on whether or not the law breathes into an applicant and their burden some sort of time constraint when the UDO does not otherwise specify one to move forward on it, I don't know the answer to that. Just don't. I do know this. The UDO that you're governing yourselves by doesn't specify a time period by which to move forward. And if I'm sitting here and a judge is being asked whether or not instead of 12 months, they took 17 months to move forward on submitting their preliminary plat for approval by right, is an unreasonable or reasonable compliance with the UDO, and the UDO doesn't specify a time limitation, I don't know what a judge would do with it. I would tell you that that's why we have judges.
Right. But we do know that the original application was made simply to get in under the wire.
Correct. No question about it.
So it was to get under the wire, get your toe in the door and set it there, and then figure out what you wanted to design.
That's correct.
Even though the drawings were done in July of 2021. So still, the drawings were made in July, and still nothing happened.
Understand. I don't know the answer to the overall question
So
about...
the original application was just to get under the deliberative wire of the council.
Which they were entitled to do.
Exactly.
That's a right.
There's no question about that. The question is...
And then,
well,
how long did they got to...
How long did they have
to do
in
something?
the absence of provisions in the UDO specifying a time constraint?
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will, Mr. Chair, if I could say one thing, and this might help the board. And
Are you on?
Huh?
Are you speaking?
I am speaking.
Okay.
I don't know if there we go.
There
So to help clear up the date difference between the application and what you see on your submittal, these big sets of plans here. I went through 3 sets of submittals for site plans. You have the most up to date. There was a complete application submitted on April 30th. It did include
2021.
2021. There was a complete set of site plans with it. I got 2 big plans and 7 sets of smaller ones. I also got a PDF digital copy as I request from every applicant. Reviewed it, and we went through this, sent comments back to them. They fixed it, sent me another set of site plans digitally. I reviewed it, sent questions or comments back. They fixed those comments for the third time. And that's when those plans were dated in July of 2021. So that's why you see a date difference. You have the most up-to-date site plans and approval by staff and the UDO before you today.
Is there a significant difference between that original application data and what we're looking at today?
No.
Look, I think this is the most important part, and people aren't going to like to hear it. But you've hired me to represent this town. The question is whether or not when they submitted their application, had they met all of the UDO's requirements for a complete submission. Chad, the answer to that was yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. April 30th, 2021, they satisfied the requirements for submitting an application under that UDO. They then refined their application and their desired plans per staff's request under technical specifications in July of 2021. At that point, they had the approval of the staff in the town of what complied with the UDO. There's nothing, frankly, now that I see this, to me, this issue is they didn't have to go forward at that point any further until they were ready to actually build on that property. And the way that they get to build on that property is not by virtue of a preliminary plat approval. That's the first step. That enables them to then go start and construct infrastructure by which to get permits for the infrastructure sufficient to support a development. And once that happens, then they come into the town for final plat approval. And it's at the point at which the final plat is approved that they're able to sell to third-party persons. That's what we did not have in the Phase 6, Section 1, 2A, whatever it was, because different approvals were done at that point in time, where they were allowed to sell lots based on bonds being put in place. Here, that's not the case now. We won't have folks potentially, allegedly, being in a lurch without having the developer go through with everything and having to rely on bonds. At this point, the developer on the front end has to put it all in the ground before they can sell a lot that the lot can be built on. And I don't think, I could be wrong, but I suspect that if I took my entire law firm and researched the issue of whether or not there was anything done wrong by the developer for seeking today's preliminary plat approval under some delay, I don't believe the law would find that. I believe they've done everything they were supposed to do. There's nothing that requires them to move any quicker on seeking preliminary plat approval if they don't want to. They got the entitlement. They got the plat to meet the specifications. At that point, they knew that they could come in by right, seek a preliminary plat approval when they were financially ready to, whatever that dictates their business, when they were ready to move forward like they are today, they could do so. And I just think that given the totality of everything, and I know people don't want to hear it, I believe that this application, sure, it could have been done the month after they submitted in July of 2021. They didn't have to.
For the edification of the people watching and present, even going back to what Mr. Dysinger said, we're redoing our UDO, which is sorely needed to keep up with the aggressive development that we're all facing here as residents and visitors. But it still won't impact any of the applications that are already before us or are already here prior to the town council adopting, which is going to be a year from now, our updated UDO.
Mr. Chair, one more thing. I want to follow up, answer your question as far as the difference in the first submittal and the second, third.
Please.
So if you look on Town of Sunset Beach review and response, I give you staff comments on
Yes.
everything. I don't backspace everything and just write complete in there. You'll see initial comments where line through.
Like in June of 2021. Yes.
Mhm.
And
You'll see
noted
line
that.
through and comments and line through each review of each submittal.
Okay.
So those are the differences between the first one and the second one. Is there a vast difference? No.
Yeah, but that's clear to
Yes.
me because
Okay.
that leaves a trail as to what the question, what was submitted, what
Yes.
the question was, and
Correct.
what the answer is. So
Correct.
I think that makes it easier for the planning board.
Yes.
One thing which is just housekeeping here, and I know I'm a housekeeping nerd, but on packet page 10 of this application, we refer twice to section 13.02 as the reason for this item on the agenda. It's really 1301. 1302 is a final plat approval, and we are certainly not giving final plat approval today. It's 1301 preliminary plat. And I'm going to move right into the segue that Chad opened up here on 1301 preliminary plat. And section 13.01 in our UDO gives a roadmap of a number of different categories, numerous, that the applicant has to meet and that the town staff looks at for compliance with our UDO. It's a checklist. And the very first one, it deals with our TRP, which is our technical review process. That's something that happens even before it comes to the planning board. Our various departments within the town, particularly public safety and Department of Public Works, gets together with the planning department and they review a potential project. And they look at it from a safety standpoint, health and welfare, access, egress. But it says that the meeting was to be held on June 2nd. You're working with the applicant to reschedule. You now say it's complete, but, and I've said this to you before, and I know it's a nuisance, but I would like to see the planning board more involved in the technical review process, at least with one or two members, so that we can then see in advance what's going to be coming eventually to the planning board, even if we're silent at those meetings. But I have no way of knowing what that technical review process report even said. I don't know what comments were made. I don't know what the fire department said. I don't know what the police department would have limited involvement here because this is in our ETJ, which is not covered by our police department. And because nobody within this territory pays taxes to the town. They pay county taxes. They pay fire fees, which are a separate item, but they do not pay town taxes. We create an ETJ, I don't want to say primarily, but with the intent that we want, as the town of Sunset Beach, to have influence over our adjacent areas, and particularly our gateways that come into this town, so that we can present ourselves in the best way possible for the benefit of property values and all kinds of other things. But the extraterritorial jurisdiction, which this all falls into, never pays a penny worth of Sunset Beach town taxes. But again, Chad, were there any items that, to your knowledge, brought up at the technical review meeting, which was held sometime after June 2nd, that might be of interest to the planning board?
No, the only ones that I've said it at the beginning were the outside agency requests from DEQ on the state stormwater and North Carolina Department of Transportation on the traffic impact analysis.
Can we talk a little bit about the traffic impact analysis and what's going to be required of the developer before? Because I think universally the concern from the community is this is right at the intersection of Old Georgetown Road and 904, which is already a very hazardous intersection. We've made some adjustment in that Old Georgetown Road will now have a speed limit of 45. They're going to put a light up at the Sea Trail entrance, which I think will improve it, but
Possibly.
Yes.
They don't have any money.
Yeah, right. Great. Can we talk a little bit about what's going to be required in terms of road improvements, road widening, turn-off lanes? There's already an entrance on Old Georgetown Road that was built and the model home is on there's going to be an egress and entrance area on 904. Can we talk a little bit about what's going to be required from NCDOT before they can do
Sybil
this?
has a comment.
That's DOT. We can't require anything of DOT. They're in control of that.
Absolutely, but we initiate a process with NCDOT. We have some familiarity with how this will work and what will be required. Can we get an update on
The
that?
way I can explain it to you and try to answer your question is through the process of how that is done.
Yeah.
Our UDO is not bounded to require a TIA. However, North Carolina Department of Transportation does require the TIA over an X amount of trips count at peak times per day. And they've looked at that. I send every application that comes in for subdivision review gets sent to outside agencies, part of my TRC process. So this was not singled out in any way. Every application gets sent that. And that's the purview of the UDO administrator.
We
and the
have
town.
input in that. As an example, we have more recently put in a suggestion to the DOT, which Old Georgetown Road is a Department of Transportation road. Seaside Road is a Department of Transportation road. They are not town-controlled streets.
So again, part of the process is that the applicant will go forth with providing DOT information, and it will be up to DOT to review it in total and require certain infrastructure upgrades if need be, such as potentially upgrading access connections, DOT road connections, or driveway permits, as they call it.
Let me give the
So that,
hold on just a second.
just for one, so
And
that's
then-
the
and then the-
process that we don't have any control over.
We do not.
The applicant and NCDOT will come to an agreement based on the traffic analysis that is required, correct?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Grady.
A traffic impact analysis that's required by the DOT is going to be professionally engineered and sealed with scientific analysis and data points. The DOT is going to review it. The DOT may say to the developer, we need this better addressed in your TIA. When the DOT is satisfied that they have a TIA that meets and answers all of the DOT's questions and concerns, at that point they look at what sorts of road improvements, infrastructure, acceleration, deceleration, Michigan turn lanes, stoplights, and all that are required to be in place by the developer to be approved. The town, other than if it's invited to ask about things or the public wants to weigh in on it with the DOT directly, that can certainly happen, but the town doesn't have any control over that because it's the DOT's province, not the town's.
But the DOT can require the developer to pay for and provide those changes to the approach areas and the roads.
I believe generally speaking that is correct, and the developer can decide whether or not they wish to do a required improvement by the DOT to facilitate the implementation of their subdivision development. They may then at that point, depending on what the DOT requires, they might say, you know what, let's go back to the town to modify our plans and tweak it a little bit to lessen the impact so as to, instead of having to build a $300,000 extra lane or a stoplight, if we knock down our density or do this modification, we don't have to do it any longer. I don't know.
Let me give the audience an example. We all know about the sanctuary that is under development right now that's directly across the street from our post office on Seaside Road. As a part of that process, some decel lanes were required. Also up at the intersection of Old Georgetown Road and Seaside, some turn lanes were added, and I believe they were at the expense of the developer of the sanctuary. That it was not something that the DOT paid for. They looked at the engineering of it, but there are certainly consequences to adding substantial amounts of new residents, how it impacts our surrounding infrastructure and streets. My concern here is it goes right along with what Mr. Richardson just said. We have section 2D here, the only way I see access in and out is through Angels Trace Road, which is in need of repair. There's also a gate there right now that's locked. And that happens to T right with Georgetown Road, right at the entrance to Sandpiper Bay. And there's 40 lots in there, so you could argue whether that's significant or not. But the entrance to Windfall, and Windfall has one entrance, is right at the area that was referred to by Mr. Dysinger as the model home area, coming in on Mayfair Way Southwest, if it's still called that. That
My
to me,
understanding is there's not a turnoff lane there.
there isn't yet.
No.
And that is a part of the traffic impact study that would have traffic TIA, traffic impact analysis, that would be prepared by the DOT. Also, one of the main entrances for a significant number of homes in section 3 through 8 is the Sunset entrance to Sunset Ridge, which is at the Seaside Methodist Church on what we refer to now as Angels Club Drive. That is certainly going to be, in my mind, a significant consideration. And I would hope that we don't go through this whole process and then the developer holds his rights to developing this. And they say, we can't afford $1 million worth of roadway improvements and roundabouts and traffic lights and decel lanes. That to me is not the best use of any of our time. I don't know that I can control that, but
You can't.
But
it's
I want to
frustrating.
say, I'm sorry, Pete, go ahead.
No, I just really, the elephant in the room is our infrastructure. And people have referenced water, which we're all concerned with. That's why I put my own well in, so I can hopefully irrigate during droughts on my bushes. But we don't control that. Long ago, the town gave up its rights to our water system when we tied in with the county, turned the water system over to the county as they put in our sewer system. So water and sewer are something that is totally outside of our purview.
But
Ask Road
but
Car.
again, all of the infrastructure will have to be in the ground, permitted, and operating before the first lot can be sold.
And that was
in
not-
what's before us today.
Just a
Not even today. If you approve the preliminary plat approval, that doesn't give the developer the ability to go sell those lots. They have to put in all the infrastructure, get all the permits, the stormwater, the water and sewer. They got to comply with the TIA and whatever the resolution is with the DOT and roads and curbs and guttering and retention ponds, all that before they can sell a lot. And they only get that a right with the final plat approval. And the final plat approval, not to step into Chad's domain here, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The final plat approval comes when we receive sign-offs from these outside agencies that say, yep, they've got their permit. Yep, they got their permit for the DOT. They got their permit for the DEQ for stormwater. Yep, they got their permit from Brunswick County Water and Sewer.
Everybody's frustration is those boxes did not need to be checked
The
for section
First
1
time,
and 2.
I understand that, and let me also. There was two concerns that have yet to be addressed, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I'm just
Please
going to go
jump.
ahead. I'm going to go ahead and deal with it. There's no provision in the UDO or under the law that I'm aware of that allows for this planning board or this town to refuse an application by a developer who the town believes has a bad track record. We just don't have that right. There's no like good conduct policy that allows you to subjectively hang your hat on something and say, well, because developer A did not meet our standards and people we believe were harmed from that, doesn't mean that years later or even the next day, developer A comes in with a different tract of land and you can refuse that application simply because you didn't like their efforts in the other development. So there's nothing like that. that you could hang your hat on for those who expressed historically, I understand the history, they got up as a preface to their remarks and talked about the bad history as they saw it with this same developer. There's nothing that allows you to reject today's preliminary plat based on that. That's number one. Number two, I heard from a young lady that came up that said the developer's representative said that this was always going to be a golf course and nothing but a golf course. Okay. The town, the planning board, the town council, town staff is not a superior court judge. Okay. So we don't get into the business of deciding whether or not something that's shown on a plat map, that's recorded in the register of deeds, something that's shown on marketing materials, or anything else constitutes an easement to keep what was shown as a golf course always a golf course. If the developer comes in and shows that they are the owner of the land, and there's nothing that's been submitted to my knowledge, and Chad can correct me if I'm wrong, that questions the ownership of the underlying fee, if the developer applicant comes forward, represents that they're the owner, backs it up, showing that they have ownership to the tract of land, the town doesn't get into the business of whether or not building on that tract of land is building over what was represented as a golf course. Those who believe that need to go get your counsel, legal counsel, and take it up with him or her to review the matter and make your challenge to a superior court judge. You can't make it here to the town council unless someone came in and offered up compelling ownership information that would call into question the developer's ownership of the land that is the subject of a preliminary plat application. I've not seen any. I've not heard any challenge. And so they've met their burden of showing that they're the owner. Doesn't mean that their ownership couldn't be subject to some sort of easement rights. We don't get into the business of the easement rights. We get into the business of whether or not the application and the land meets the town's UDO. The judge would get into the question of whether or not that land can be developed because someone has superior easement rights that prevent it. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that being said, I think it's clear that we have a limited amount of control, thank you, and that our responsibility is to making sure that our unified development ordinances are in fact complied with. And I'd like to start into that process a little bit, and then we're going to decide as a group for either approval with conditions or denial of this application.
Can I ask one quick question? This development is in the overlay district, correct?
It is not.
No.
It's not? Okay.
It's in
It's in the ETJ.
I'm a tree hugger. Somebody said they weren't. I'm a tree hugger. Proud. I think we've done a horrible job as a town in being able to control clear cutting. And I appreciate, as being a contractor, I appreciate the need, the economic need for a developer to go in and clear cut. It makes economic advantage to them. But the tree list on the drawings here on our existing addition sheet VF 102 seems to very specifically number and identify a series of trees. There's like 150 of them. And I notice, and this is a question for the applicant, and I don't know who specifically is representing the applicant from a drawing standpoint here, where I can ask nerd questions about the details. But if that person could come up to the microphone.
Becky Lane.
They won't be too technical, but somebody just needs to understand what's been submitted.
All right. Which page? What page are you?
VF 102.
Good morning.
Morning. Your name, please?
Mason Manhertz.
Okay, Mason. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome to Sunset Beach.
Yes.
Thank you.
There, on the various utility plans, and there's utility plans that are specific to each of the sections throughout the set of drawings.
Right.
And on them, you can find, with a magnifying glass and a lot of patience, you can find trees that have been designated and numbered.
Right.
What I am unclear of is those trees, and you've specifically located them on the utility plan, are those trees that are to remain? Or is that all the heritage trees that are on the lot? And you will then determine with individual approval by the town on a tree-by-tree basis as to whether there's a legitimate reason for removing that heritage tree or retaining it.
Okay. Well, forgive my memory. I know per the Sunset Beach UDO, we are required to save as many heritage trees as we can. And we've indicated on the plans, on the landscaping plans, what heritage trees we plan on removing because they're going through right-of-ways or they're going through infrastructure. All other heritage trees we do plan on retaining, and then individual lot owners will have to do individual heritage removal requests if they want to remove heritage trees on their lots. So
Well, and I have a question. I mean, one of the issues that's coming up is, the Ocean Ridge HOA is an independent HOA. It's not controlled by the declarant. We have heard two very compelling arguments as to why this settlement should not be part of Ocean Ridge and would need then to have its own HOA. And I would ask whether the declarant would control that HOA or not.
I don't know that that's in our purview at all to even bring up.
It's in our
as
purview.
a civil engineer, I can't
Okay.
answer that question, but
The way I understand it, the tree thing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you got the list of trees and you're showing them by number. Some of them have an X through them, which means those are the trees you're removing due to infrastructure.
due to infrastructure.
The ones that are, the rest are remaining for the engineering part, but because they occur on individual lots, it's up then to the lot owner to handle what happens to that tree.
I'm going to ask Chad a question that bootlegs right off of that, if you can, and then you can come back to you.
Is that correct
But
interpretation?
an individual lot owner, I don't believe, has the obligation to request a permit for the removal of a tree on an individual residential lot, where a developer on a subdivision does. And if that is in fact going to be the scenario, then I'm uncomfortable that.
Yeah, I am too.
And I'm uncomfortable.
Well, from the developer's perspective, we are saving as much trees as we can.
Due to infrastructure,
And
roadways, sewers, drainage, stormwater management.
Amenity centers.
So in a rough estimate of the percentage of trees that are going to be preserved, what are we looking at? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%?
No, it's more than half.
More than half?
Yeah.
I can't.
I went through and tried to
remember.
figure out where the X's were, but the X's, the trees that they're Xing out are much less than the trees that were remaining. But most of the remaining trees, many of them occur on a lot. Like for instance, see this bunch here?
Yeah.
On number 43, that's where the house would be.
And so you know that they're not going to remain.
The person building that house can't possibly keep those trees. It's right in the center of the lot. Yeah. I'm looking at LS 104, okay, which is section 4.
Yes.
It kind of, if you look at that section, it's pretty simple, and you can see.
You could go to any drawing and have the same question.
Right. Up in the upper right-hand corner, they got the little box with the X through the tree saying heritage tree proposed to be removed for critical infrastructure. Then in the bottom left-hand corner, they talk about the replanting of trees which are along the roadways, the treescape. And if you look on this particular page, there's only 3 trees with an X through them, and there's, I don't know, another 20 trees without the X through them.
Yeah,
what I'm interested in preserving is the UDO's ability to make sure that heritage trees are addressed on an individual basis as to whether they're removed or not, and that it has to be approved by the town that those trees are, that's a good enough excuse, if you will, to remove a heritage tree. That is, I think, as best as we can do Pardon me?
Yeah, so when it comes to heritage trees, yes, they can be removed, but they must be replanted. The replanting schedule, going forward with this does meet the criteria that what the UDO says. If it is up to if they wish to leave heritage trees, that's highly encouraged. If it gets down to the individual lot owners as the applicant, and that you work for Cape Fear, right?
Cape Fear Engineering.
Yeah, so Cape Fear Engineering drew this up. And at that point, at some point, they'll be turned over to the individual lot owners to build their lot, build on their lot, house, swimming pool, driveway, whatever. That is, as long as it's in the purview of the UDO to allow them to do so. If they wish to remove a heritage tree at that point, if it's up to the individual lot owners, remember there is a replanting schedule that has to come in before CO is given.
Which we need to strengthen.
And again, I want to touch base on something that has not been mentioned into this meeting yet, but I want to go back a few meetings to what our friend Wes McLeod said with the Cape Fear Council of Governments. When you get into tree protection, preservation, what the stormwater regulations, what the rights that the developer and owner has on the property, you can't deem it unbuildable by making them keep the enormous amount of trees on it. All right. So remember, we're going through that with our landscaping portion of our UDO.
Right.
So keep all that in mind as you deliberate and think in on your decision today as well.
I'll add as well. Landowners have the right to develop their property. Okay, it is, for lack of a better way of saying, a God-given right. We got zoning ordinances that allow for protections and some restrictions on it. But if you have an ordinance of trees and it essentially renders a lot unbuildable because of some rigid enforcement of tree removal ordinances, then you are in effect effectuating an inverse condemnation and taking of someone's land, and you got to pay for just compensation of it.
I apologize to Mason, but I'm going to have one more question on trees, even though you might not be the tree expert. And this is just a general question. On all these plans, all the treescape trees, the little red ones on the plans,
Right.
you identified only one species, the laurel oak, which is one of our approved species. And you got like thousands of them here you're putting in. And I guess I probably can't enforce this, but that seems unwise.
Well, I can
to put the same tree in all over.
Yeah.
Some Asian bug comes over and decides to eat only laurel oaks. I mean, I guess from a design standard, and you may not know this because maybe you didn't do the landscape. Did you just put that in there to have one when it seems like tree diversity?
Just as a placeholder, for the clarity of plans. But
could we have a note that you're going to use this or another approved large heritage tree?
You do get into the case you can't.
I know.
If it's only approved, if they wanted to plant 15,000 of the same tree, they have the provision to do that.
So it's something we need to look at then. It's just an
let the record state
it's an
that
unwise
would probably be in everyone's best interest to have a varietal.
And as each section is being built and reviewed by the town, we can take a look at offering more diverse set of trees in our landscaping.
And I will say this about Ocean Ridge. If you drive through Ocean Ridge, it is a well-treed development. Now, most of them are loblolly pines, which are not heritage trees, but there is a general diversity of tree species.
Let's not try to link too much between the two different neighborhoods.
Well, so I guess I would question the developer to consider some more tree diversity. If you look at the existing land, the tree list, there was a lot of like red maples there.
And that'll be reflected in the minutes with your response, I guess, would be that the developer will seriously take that into consideration.
We'll definitely take that into consideration.
Great. All right.
Thank you.
One item I have, and this I'm going to move away from trees a little bit, not far, because I'm trying to go through the drawings in order.
Okay.
We have these are private roads that are all within this area for the preliminary plat. None of them would be town roads at this point in time.
Right.
However, they still have to be constructed under town municipal code requirements for cross-section. And I know that there's an obligation of the town, the Department of Public Works, to come in periodically and inspect those roads. And I think what developers typically do is they provide us an engineering report for proof rolling and stability of the subgrade, and then a core samples of the various thicknesses of the different structural layers. But Cape Fear Engineering shows a 6-inch ABC stone base. And I believe our municipal code requires an 8-inch. Now, it could be that this came in underneath that.
Mm-hmm. It did.
Um,
When was that adopted? That was adopted.
I don't remember when that was ever done.
So the new general code adoption was either in July or August. So this would fall under the old general code,
what year?
2021. Dustin and I, the director of public works, looked at that.
That didn't come before us.
I'll let the town administrator speak on that one.
And I guess it wouldn't come before us. Okay.
But to go forward with this more is that as roads and infrastructure get improved, gets installed, core samples will be given to Public Works in the town for approval before final plat is before y'all to be approved as well. So.
I think it would be in the best interest of everyone involved in this community to have at a minimum of an 8-inch base course underneath a roadway. I think our design standards have shown that for service life, that's important. I know we can't enforce that apparently, but I would like the developer to take that under consideration.
It does say in note 11, all roads rebuilt to town of Sunset beat construction standards.
Well, those were the standards
Shall be
at the time.
Isn't that the time of construction, not time of planning?
I think that was meant for the time of the ordinance when these plans were
Well,
submitted.
no, well, wait, I'm an engineer. If a design standard changes, your plan has to change. I mean, it's a known change.
Well,
this is an engineering standard, not a...
Regardless, when these sections are built, the standards that we build them to are going to be looked at a section-specific basis. And if it's determined that the base course section, for example, needs to be 8 inches, then we'll make that call at that time. But we haven't really gotten to the nitty-gritty of the design at this moment.
So just like the trees, you're going to take that under consideration.
Right.
I'm not trying to be cute, and I appreciate your, because you could tell us the flat height. It's
right.
I just want to make sure that no one misunderstands. They only have to build this subdivision to the standards of the UDO in place at the time they submitted their application. Not any subsequent design standards, aesthetic standards, construction standards, road standards, any standards, unless they consensually agree to it. But if they don't want to voluntarily do it, they're entitled to the protections and the expectations of the prior UDO standards and specifications. Any rules that subsequently change, they are not bound to unless they voluntarily decide that they want to do so.
Well, I think there's a fine point distinction here. We're approving the layout of where the roads are, not the construction standard of the road.
The construction standard in the road is
at the time that you're doing it.
Grady.
What this plat is showing the location of the road, not how the engineering and construction standard, material, whatever, that goes into it when you begin to build it.
If the construction standards are addressed in the UDO that existed at the time they submitted their application on April 30th of 2021, it is those construction standards to which they are entitled to build their development by right, unless they voluntarily agree otherwise.
I think that's a clear answer. We may not like the answer, but it's a clear answer.
I know there are people that don't like that answer. We are governed by law. We must follow the law. I don't want to be in court explaining why my town did not follow the law.
Thank you, Grady. Stormwater is obviously a major concern of a lot of us. We've got a lot of issues in the town We don't want to build more issues into our future subdivisions. Jerry, I think, had a comment or a question about stormwater.
Most recently, Brunswick County is reconsidering moving their stormwater management to almost to a 100-year floodplain. What are these designed as right now? Just what's in place, as Grady would say?
Well, this is for preliminary plat
Plat,
approval.
yeah.
We haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty of design, but I can assure you that they will be designed to Sunset Beach, Brunswick County, and state stormwater standards.
Well, the county, going back to the trees and the cross-section of the pavement, when you go in for a stormwater permit and provide an engineered set of designs for this entire subdivision, the county, I'm sure, will impose on you their present stormwater requirements.
Correct. And
Not
yes.
what was at the application time.
Absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
they don't even know that you made an application.
Right, and I can't remember the last time Brunswick County has changed their stormwater standards. So
Okay.
We would be designing to their current stormwater standards.
And I'll
As
say
well,
this-
we would be designing to the current state stormwater standards.
I'll say this on behalf of the applicant and this board and the town, is that TRC comments were brought forward from Brunswick County Utilities and Stormwater, along with DEQ and DOT, and those comments have been provided to the applicant.
So is
as
this,
well.
this has to do with the 1.5-inch rule?
No, yeah, I mean,
No,
that's
on an individual lot.
We're not talking about, we get into that when we get lot specific. When we're
Okay.
talking about stormwater infiltration on each individual lot. It's a stormwater plan for the whole entirety of this project.
I think Jerry was
Yeah,
on a
just
track here.
just one. Again, this is only plot, and I can only assume. I can only hope that the downspouts will be connected to the storm system, the downspouts of the homes.
Yes, I mean, and Jerry, when we get to individual
Yes,
lots,
okay.
and yeah, so
There's one other
that's
comment
addressed.
in here is who determines and when that the existing ponds, not the planned retention ponds, become part of the collection system.
That's something that we'll take a look at.
It's in your document there that's what the plan is supposed to say.
What are you referring to specifically?
It's in there someplace that in the event that the
CS 101.
Right.
Yeah.
That will be determined as each section is designed.
Okay.
If we need more pond space and we decide that
you're going to decide.
K for engineering.
Okay.
Will decide. I will probably be a part of that process. If the proposed stormwater pond area is not sufficient, we will utilize existing pond area for our stormwater treatment ponds.
A couple more. On CS 107, you have the neighborhood amenity center and also being used as an open space. Just some clarification there of what percentage is being open space and what is being used for the neighborhood.
Per the Sunset Beach UDO, all recreational amenities can be considered open space.
Chad, I'm under the impression that even though it says neighborhood amenity center 1.03 acres, that does not enter into our review of this. If all of a sudden they come by and they say they want to make that 0.95 acres, that is not a deal breaker for their preliminary plat approval.
Yeah, I mean, all the open space meets the open space that's listed in here, and the requirements and net and gross and all that is before you.
How did you determine that? Did you do it by CAD or did they provide you that?
They provided
those
to us.
footprints?
It's on page C 001, open space requirements, in the middle of the top page of minimum open space required, 15% of the gross area, total open space provided, broken down into sections.
Okay.
So the only caveat that we'll say to this is if amenity center does get developed and come forward, that's a separate approval process. So
okay.
Yeah, because I have a question. The way I read it,
Were you,
it-
were you finished with your stormwater questions?
Those,
Go ahead,
I'd
Ron.
like to come back to some of the infrastructure questions.
Okay, all right.
So-
Richard, fire.
yeah, my question is in terms of what's been pre-approved. I'm assuming that's going to be constructed first, and then we'll come back and take a look at this once the infrastructure's in. In those section, there is not an amenity center. Am I wrong here?
Which section are you referring to?
Section 1 and 2.
Section
have been
1 and 2
already
are-
approved.
No, they already approved. That's the existing model house lots that are
Right.
controversial. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about
Well,
today.
actually, it does because there are no amenity centers built in that section. Are you going to build an amenity center prior to the construction of these other lots?
We are not dealing with sections 1 and 2.
No, but the amenity centers are in section 3, 4,
Yeah.
6.
We're not doing 1 and 2 at all. That's
I
completely
understand.
separate from
but
this.
my question is about the amenity center that is in section 3, 4, and others. Otherwise, you're going to have a significant number of homes with no amenity center.
I'll just say, and the developer can correct me if I'm wrong, all the amenities for the entire development will be shared.
So your expectation is that the Ocean Ridge HOA is going to, and do you have an agreement with the existing Ocean Ridge HOA as to access to the amenities that are within the purview of that homeowners association?
I can't speak any
That's
further.
outside.
We are veering so far off of what this agenda item is supposed to be about.
I respectfully disagree.
It is not something to sit here and ask an applicant about what's going to happen with an HOA setup and declarant rights. It's about whether or not this application's preliminary plat should be approved or disapproved based upon its compliance with the UDO.
And I respectfully disagree that I think this issue of the HOA is one that's going to pose a significant issue in terms of the viability of what we're being asked to approve. So
Where in the UDO does it make it a condition of understanding the HOA's consistency on this application? Where in the UDO? Where in the Code of Ordinances does it talk about how we have to have details and specs on how an HOA is set up? Because if you show me that, then I will agree with you.
It doesn't exist.
It does not exist, which is why it's not appropriately before this board today.
As much as it frustrates all of us,
Pete,
it is
I
not.
appreciate Grady's comments. My frustration is, and I think the community's frustration is, we're a planning board. Okay? I would like to hear, as part of this process, what the developer is planning. I think it is an appropriate question. Yes, I understand it's not directly linked to a UDO, but it is an issue that's going to come back and bite us in the proverbial butt if we don't get some clarity on how this is going to work. So I will cease and desist, but I think this is an appropriate question to get answered while we're in the preliminary part of this process.
But that's not our job. That is not our job. Our job is to make sure that anyone who wants to build in this area, I sympathize with these people, but if you want to build and you have met all of the code that existed, then what we have to do is approve that. We can't approve what might happen, what should happen, what could happen. It's what we've got in front of us.
And I think that attitude is why we have a history that goes back to 2006 of a very unsatisfactory process in terms how this developer, I mean, and listen, I have great admiration for what they built in Ocean Ridge, but we have to have a process.
I'm going to gavel. Our town attorney has mentioned it 3 times now, that we're drifting off of the agenda item and the topic at hand. We need to continue on with the review that the applicant is entitled to without bringing in sidebar conversations. Thank you.
I got a couple more questions.
Jerry?
Go ahead.
About the plot plan, of course. Is the improvement of the Angel Trace Road be part of the infrastructure?
It's shown as a access and egress point on the preliminary plat. And I think there is obviously not, nothing's obvious. I think there is an unknown as to who owns that road.
I'm surprised.
You know, I'm sure the Coastal Communities has part of that. I'm sure, at least I've been told that Sea Trail Masters Association has some control over that. I've also heard that Bill Clark Homes has some control over that road. How do we show that as a access egress point without knowing who owns it and who is giving permission to tie into that?
I don't know who owns that road. Right, we have it listed as a private right of way.
Chad shared with me that that road now is washed out, and the sanctuary is under the obligation to correct that washout.
Probably their portion.
That's at the
of it.
south end.
Their
They're not
portion.
accessing it from the south end,
They're accessing it from,
the north end, the northern half.
okay.
Ma'am, if you will, and I know you represent the applicant, but please come to the microphone so people can hear you and give us your name, please.
I just wanted to say that we do have complete access rights to Angels Trace Road, which is why we made this an access point, but it is not in the area that you're speaking of near the sanctuary.
So the washout there doesn't impact egress in or out?
The
road is.
Great.
If you could remain there, please. Chad, has that information or substantiation of that information been provided to the town staff
For Angels Trace
for
Road?
Angels Trace Road?
No, it has not.
So
Now, I will say this, there is and Becky can, or Lane, or the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an existing connection there in the previous section. That's correct.
Mhm.
Now, any of the new sections, 2D through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, do not have any connections into that road. Am I correct on that? I'm looking at it now. The only two access points that would, again, meet the definition of the UDO and furthermore, building and fire code was with this many units having more than one entrance and exits, which they have. They have one off of Georgetown Road and another future connection that would be updated to come out on 904.
Yes, there's 3 access points.
Okay.
now, Chad, thank you. Appreciate that. I would like to have the town privy to that access.
I don't know the ramifications, rules, regulations, the authority, or any of that. I'm sure town will work with applicant and surrounding on if they're willing to connect and stuff like that. But if it's not a town road, if it's a public road, it would have to be on a effort by the applicant to be able to do so. I would defer the other part of that if I've missed anything to the town administrator sitting to my left and the town attorney who was also sitting to my left.
I don't understand the question.
Well, because maybe I can throw something else in that make it even more confusing. Section 2D with roughly 40 lots in it. The only access and egress is off of the future Wallace Way, which is a part, and I know we're not talking about sections 1 and 2 here. It's not a part of the application, but that's the only way in and out of that I see for section 2D. Otherwise, they're landlocked. There is no access onto Georgetown Road. It's only onto Angels Trace Road through Wallace Way and Montclair Place. So that, I guess, even further complicates it. We're tying in with an existing section that is not yet developed, section 2, with section 2D. And then that only is limited to, or restricts the traffic to go out onto Angels Trace Road, which that's why I started with the original question as to who has control of Angels Trace Road, and I don't know.
I believe before section 2D could be developed, that Chad would probably require us to have a paved street to that section to get to an access point. Would that be correct?
but there's not one shown here.
Well, the existing right of way shown.
Repeat that again, Becky.
Yeah.
Are you questioning the access to Angel's Trace or the access into 2D? And
Well,
trying to make the
both. I'm saying,
distinction.
how does section 2D get in and out of their lots?
Via Montclair Place. The
And
existing
which
right
then goes on to Wallace Way, which then
Correct.
goes on to Angels Trace Road.
Yes.
And those two other roads, Montclair and Wallace, are complete.
No,
No.
they do not exist yet.
They do not exist yet.
No, they're under development. There's
Yes.
water and sewer down Montclair.
But the roadways do
Place.
not exist.
But I
The
think
right
the,
of way exists, but
the question
paving
is,
not complete.
will those, the part of Montclair and Wallace that gets the Angel Trace will have to be
So
completed?
I'll say this, and Grady, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going to tread lightly. Section 2D, which is I would say probably 20 to 30 lots in the top left-hand corner of this.
40.
All right. In order for that infrastructure to be approved, you have to be able to provide an access to it. So therefore, the remaining infrastructure that's below it that provides access to it would certainly have to be developed and approved by the town, which is currently under construction, under review, and in the middle of developing that infrastructure as well.
So that will have to be a paved road, at least that section from 2D to get the Angel Trace.
Yeah, the infrastructure will have to
So
be.
that Montclair Place, the 50-foot right-of-way
Yes.
that connects to 2D will have to be a paved road, and the little piece of Wallace that goes
Yes.
left or
Yeah, the
apparently
infrastructure will
west,
have to be installed. for
that will have to be a completed paved road.
Yes.
And Angels Trace Road would have to be brought up to standards, and that's where my question starts. I don't question who controls the road you just mentioned, but I question who controls Angels Trace Road. Who owns it?
Oh, we have legal access to utilize that road.
Yeah, that's two
That
different
doesn't-
questions. You have an easement to the road?
Yes, certainly.
So you have an
yes.
unrestricted easement to the road. So,
Access easement,
It can't be revoked.
not to my knowledge.
and then who maintains the road there? In other words, if there's, say the pavement disappears because there's a storm, who fixes that road?
I think there's shared responsibility in that location that we're
Oh
talking,
boy,
that we're
that's the one
speaking
that
about.
scares me to death. Yeah, I mean, Angels Trace has had a very sordid history. As someone that lives in Sugar Sands and backs up against Angel Trace, I mean, that road used to be able to egress that road all the way from Seaside to Old Georgetown Road. That hasn't been true for a long time. So, this ability to be able to say, yes, we as a developer are going to make sure that this road is kept up to standards, I think is got to be a requirement, particularly for anybody. I mean, the other option is to where that little roundabout is, or courtyard, punch through to Old Georgetown Road, and now they've got egress from Old Georgetown Road. Now,
I'll
that's
say
not going
this.
to make some of those lot owners happy, but
I'll
I
say
don't see a
this to-
solution here.
I'll say this to the board, and the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong. When it comes to the UDO, again, the building code and the fire code, when it comes to entrance and exit points, with this many lots, there are two that are required, 2 entrances and exits. Anything over 30 units, there are some section law out there that extends that 30 to 100, has to have 2 entrances and 2 egresses and entrances and exits. That first one exists coming off of Georgetown Road. That is not Angels Trace Road. And the second one would come in off of NC 904.
Which is off of Angels Club Road.
Angels Club Road. It would be up to the applicant, if willing, not required by this proposal and the UDO. If they wanted to upfit Angels Trace Road, they could if they would like to. If not, this would be a dead-end connection, but it's also under Section 1 and 2. I'm not privy to what was approved when that. I didn't.
But
again,
what's the 2 to 2D? You're talking about this group of sections together having 2?
So obviously,
but 2D doesn't have 2.
You could construe that it has two, because you could go out to Windfall and you can go out to the Methodist Church.
You mean this way?
Yeah, on over streets that they control. Now, I agree that that's
also
stretching.
through Wallace Way again, right?
Yes, exactly. But that Wallace Way would have to then be developed.
So that's going that way
Yeah.
and that way. That's the two. But it
I'm
all
sorry,
the two,
oh, I see.
the two create from the intersection of Montclair and Wallace Way, right?
Becky,
Either
if
you
I
go east
can,
or west.
Board, if I can, Becky and Elaine, I want to ask y'all a question. In order to get to 2D, the infrastructure some way through section 1 and 2 would have to be developed enough to be able to get through the ingress and egress through that part of the phase of development. Am I correct?
That was my understanding, yes,
Okay.
that's the plan.
So say that again, Chet.
So I just asked the applicant for section 2D to be developed and be brought forth with a final plat. Some kind of infrastructure, ingress and egress would have to be provided through section 1 and 2 to be able to get to 2D. And the applicant just said yes.
I also believe that many of these questions will be soundly addressed in the TIA with the DOT. It's my understanding Ms. Anglin has put in a request of the DOT for feasibility study regarding connectivity from the standpoint of public safety.
Well, my concern is that DOT analysis may only concern 904, and because right now I'm not sure what the status of Angel Trace Road is. I don't know if it's a DOT road.
It's not.
Then I would
Then DOT is going to look at it and go, okay, this is a road that we can use to provide the necessary access. They're going to look at 904 and they're going to look at Old Georgetown Road, but they're not going to look at Angel Trace.
Well, my response to that would be twofold. Angel's Trace is shown, however minimally, it's still shown as one of the roads for which they're seeking preliminary plat approval. And from my standpoint, whatever is shown of Angel's Trace on this plat has to meet town code of ordinances. It has to meet DOT standards for construction, and anybody else that has any governance over the construction standards. So to the extent someone were to argue, well, Angel's Trace is not something that's directly within our responsibility, I would say that's debatable at best. I think whatever's shown on that preliminary plat is something that's fair game. And you know what? Why don't this board give instructions to its staff to make it clear by sending a request to the NCDOT that the NCDOT be certain to thoroughly review and vet the aspect of Angel's Trace Road for any approvals of building subdivision streets.
Well, I guess my question is then that
Good point.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a good point, and
How do we do that?
and can we do that?
How do we do that?
Did you get
And
that?
my question to the
Just
to
say,
the applicant is, the easiest solution is for the applicant to take responsibility for Angel Trace Road from Wallace Way
You
to
can't
Old Georgetown Road.
You can't
and make
impose
it
that.
comply with the town
You
ordinance.
cannot impose that. They can get the rights in a written perpetual document from whoever owns and controls it. They don't have to do anything more than that.
Well, they claim to already have it, so.
Well,
A
yeah,
deed
the
of
claim
easement.
is made that they have it.
Must be a
and I
deed of
believe
easement.
them.
I've seen no evidence to suggest that their assertions that they have easement rights over Angel's Trace are wrong. So unless there's someone that comes forward with clear, convincing, and cogent evidence and competent evidence to suggest otherwise, you have to take the applicant's application at face value. They've got a preliminary plat. We know they access Angel's Trace Road. You have to review the plat as submitted. If someone wants to challenge easement rights, this is not the venue, nor is town council, nor staff level, nor town attorney level. It's for a superior court judge in Brunswick County.
So I take it we need some sort of motion to request that the town
I think
forward a request to NCDOT to include in their TIA the impact of Angel Trace Road, 60-foot private road right of way.
I don't think you need a motion. I think you just need as a board to give a directive to Chad and Lisa or both.
Okay, I move we give that directive.
I second.
We need a vote?
We have a motion. It's been seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
What was the motion? You've gotten me so wrong.
About giving
I don't
it-
even know what the
the
motion is
motion-
for them to
I
give it
thought
to
it was
them.
just going
Fine.
to, the motion was to direct Chad and Lisa to make sure to make a request of the NCDOT to review the status of Angels Trace Road.
Okay.
Correct.
Which I've already done.
Thank you. And your vote was affirmative?
Yes, I did.
Okay, all right, unanimous.
Now, Liz, you said you've already done this?
Yes, sir. For public safety reasons, I have asked DOT to do a feasibility study of Angel Trace Road to connect Sunset Boulevard North with Old Georgetown so that the fire trucks can get over there quicker.
Great. All right. Thank you, Liz.
Jerry?
One more question dealing strictly with this preliminary plan. Is the amenity centers and the proposed pocket parks part of the infrastructure that have to be completed?
No, the amenity centers would be a separate major site development permit that would be done separately and approved by this board separately on a different case-by-case basis.
You answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
But the spot would be left. If they wanted to build on it, they'd have to come back.
Yeah, it'd have to be a modification to preliminary plat. So
Could they add that in the final plat, or it has to be done?
final plat would be based on preliminary plat.
I'll make note to the other my fellow members of the planning board that our UDO generally really addresses this already. In section 503, I'll read from it. Section 503, paragraph C is in Charlie, section 2A. Access to the site from adjacent roads shall be designed so as to interfere as little as possible with traffic flow on these roads and to prevent vehicles a rapid and safe ingress and egress to the site. And so that is our obligation to make sure that that is in fact done. And I think we have covered that, and that gives us the right to impose that, even if the DOT doesn't seem to address that to our satisfaction. I think that we still have that right to review that again.
Okay.
I'll just make a note. The intersection of Georgetown Road and Seaside Road is the most dangerous intersection we have in this town. There's a stoplight there, but that's the majority of our vehicular incidents, and I see that from the fire department standpoint, certainly. Back in 2014, when the last official traffic study was done, that intersection was already at 89% of its capacity during the wintertime. During the summertime, it exceeded its capacity. Now, there's been some improvements made to it via the sanctuary's traffic impact analysis. But that was to deal with the sanctuary, not to deal with the Ocean Ridge phases that we're dealing with here. So we need to certainly take that in consideration and really emphasize with the DOT the importance for public health and safety, because that is our obligation. I am personally, I have a difficult time agreeing and supporting this application. However, and I'm glad that Grady is here today. I think he's given us a reality check, which I don't like, but I appreciate the applicant has rights, and that we are here as a planning board to make sure that they follow our ordinances. And also the planning board's obligation is to make sure that we revise our ordinances in the future so that things are better. But I would have no cause to deny this.
I have just a general question for Chad. Currently, under UDO, we also get to look at the final plat, right? Now, if that should happen to change at some point in the future, ones that were applied for under the old UDO would continue that way, or do we need to write that in the new one to say that? In other words, say whoever both of these today get approved under the old UDO and there's a change sometime in the future that removes that final plat to come to the planning board because it started under the old rules, would it finish under the old rules? Are you thinking not?
I am very familiar.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I'm very familiar with that scenario. When it comes to permit choice, of whatever comes out of that timing of that, I will be seeking advice from Mr. Richardson on how that permit choice is applied.
Or could we, if we make changes where it's saying it's no longer required, should we write that into there that those
I don't think
started
that,
under?
and again, I'll reach out to Wes and
Right.
we'll make that. Again, it comes down to permit choice. The applicant has rights, and I'll make sure that the application is facilitated through the proper process. If that means coming back through this board, it will come back through this board. If that means it stays on my desk and staff has the authority to review it, then that will be what we do.
There's also the aspect of whether or not there were rights that became vested, whether those rights have been lost because no action was taken on them. It's too much of a open-ended question to be able to give you a definitive answer. I think everyone in this room can rest assured that there are certain developments that make sure that they follow, that they are carefully reviewed. So I think everyone can go home today knowing that if there's a change made to a prior approval, it'll be scrutinized by Chad, Wes, and probably me, along with anybody else with staff and TR technical review committee persons, to make sure it's compliant with the law, given the facts that exist at the time that is done.
All right, thank you. Any other specific comments about the application from members of the planning board? Any additional questions for the applicant? Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Chad, your input here. Our next step would be to provide a position for the planning board on this application.
Yeah, you would need to request a motion.
And our three choices, am I correct, are approval with conditions, or denial?
Approval, denial, or under the recommendation that he gives you, or the advice of the attorney, you could table it for whatever reason, but those would be your three options: approval, denial, or a recommendation from Grady on some sort of tabling.
Tabling this would need a specific instructions to, would it need specific instructions to the applicant as to what additional information
And
they
if
need?
the purview of the UDO allows the denial, tabling, and or approval.
Yeah.
So we would have to have specific conditions.
Right. But Chairman, I would, well,
You would have to have specific reasons for seeking to table it.
Yes.
Meaning those reasons, in my opinion, would have to be that there is a deficiency with the preliminary plat that is being sought for approval, or the application materials, or that there is some material substantive questions that are unanswered with the submission presently before you. Or the developer decides that they want to ask this council, this board, to table it for whatever reason, and there is no request that I'm aware of being made by the applicant.
I guess for the chair, my comment would be,
Well, access and egress is the only thing I can.
right, but we're assuming we're still under this UDO, we get to look at the final, and approval today starts the 1-year clock, definitely, because that's in the UDO that they applied under.
Is that true, Chad? That you concur?
I will say that vested rights start at the approval from this board to the applicant. Now, as far as vested rights on how it is reviewed, 1 year, the town would not take position of taking back any rights to the applicant unless
But we can put conditions on an approval.
we would not get into Mr. Richardson would not allow the town to get into the business of taking vested rights unless he has deemed it approved where certain actions happen.
The law on vested rights is one that is murky at best. It is a continuum, a spectrum. It depends on a case-by-case basis whether or not someone who gets rights has exercised enough of those rights within the applicable time periods so as to not have lost those rights. There is no possible way I can make that determination today for something that may or may not happen a year from now. It would be, if it came up and it was an issue presented as to whether or not someone had lost their vested rights, I would sit down with staff, I would review everything, I'd get the developer side of things, and ultimately would render my opinion, and the town at that point can make its decision, which if it was adverse, I suspect would go challenged in Superior Court.
The objection that I find, or at least the conditions that I am concerned about, is Angel's Trace Road. I believe that is substantial. I believe it is important to the entire Section 2D, even though it may not be pertinent to Sections 3 through 8, or as pertinent. There is one application before us, which includes all of that. I would like to see the applicant, and I'm opening this for discussion with the rest of the planning board. I would like to see the applicant address ownership of and agreements that would involve at least the northern half of Angel's Trace Road. Discussion?
Yeah, I'm totally agree. I think my opinion on that is pretty clear.
Ron?
Well, I agree with the concept. I just don't know how we do that.
I don't see how it applies into following the guidelines that we require and they've met. This is adding something that is not.
As Grady said, if they have an easement to it, they have an easement to it, but so be it. I don't think there's any other. They have access, if they have an unconditional easement to access that road, which is what they've claimed, and there's been no proof otherwise, they do. And it just is there.
And just remember, you're only approving a preliminary plat. This is not something that tomorrow they get to go selling lots off to third parties that could be harmed. It's got a long way to go between today, if you approve it, and a final plat approval that enables those sales to go forward.
Grady, in a final plat approval, don't they have to answer my question?
They'll have to answer your question to the NCDOT, right. Brunswick County perhaps, fire and rescue, and the staff.
Before we approve
the question
final plat.
But the question of ownership, and they're going to have to answer Lisa's inquiry. I mean, the DOT is going to have to address Lisa's question that pertains specifically to what you're talking about from a public safety standpoint and get satisfied on that. So the only thing that's not going to be addressed in the final plat approval from my standpoint is ownership of Angel's Trace Road, because it is immaterial.
Right.
Even if it's something that is a true issue, it's not something we get into.
Our question, I don't think, is to ownership. I understand that. Our question is to usability. They have the easement. They're going to use the easement. They're showing that they're going to use the easement, which means, in my mind, they're required to maintain the road or the easement. But it's unclear what that means on responsibility. I mean, it could turn into a dirt road
Well,
The easement is to the land that the road sits on.
I would submit to you that I believe that the issue of Angels Trace Road and its maintenance, its standards, are all going to be covered by outside agencies, namely starting with and ending with the DOT, making sure that folks that were to buy into Section 2D, Delta, have sufficient, safe, and open ingress, egress, and regress to and from their homes.
So I guess the question, maybe I won't put words in Pete's mouth. Other than what we've already done, there's nothing we can do to ensure that that is done perpetually for that section.
And that's the key, that it can't be revoked.
At the preliminary plat stage, I would submit to you there's nothing that can be done. Come time for final plat approval, let's just play this out. I suspect that by final plat approval request, this developer who sat through this today is going to realize that they better have Angels Trace buttoned up. Because I suspect it won't get approved if there's any aspect of Angels Trace that remains uncertain as to maintenance, ingress, egress, and regress from a public health, safety, and welfare standpoint.
And is it fair for us to assume, Mr. Richardson, that a 1-year clock would be start on approval of the preliminary plat until the final plat would be submitted?
That's vague, he said. Yeah.
You get into a vested rights thing that's murky at best, as Mr. Richardson said. And I know what the UDO says. I know what we're trying to change the UDO to.
But does the clock start on approval today?
Yes.
That's what the UDO says.
1 year starts today. 1 year from today, if the question is presented as to whether or not they have sufficiently exercised those rights so that they're vested, we'll deal with it then.
And at that time, could one of the recourses be that the preliminary plat approval was withdrawn?
It could be one of the recourses would be that they lost their vested rights and now would have to resubmit under the current prevailing UDO at that time, whatever they wish to develop.
So their placeholder would be lost.
It could be lost.
It's up to the court to decide.
I mean,
all right.
there's
an unfair question.
Well, there's a spectrum, right? There's after today, they do absolutely nothing for 1 year and a day. Then I think you got a pretty good case. They've lost their rights. But what if they started laying stormwater piping and retention ponds and expended $500,000, even though you see little to no effort out there? I suspect that's sufficient to survive and have vested rights. You've got this spectrum. At the end of the day, though, they can't get final, if they get final plat approval, they get to build it. Well, they only get final plat approval if they've gone and done everything they're supposed to do.
Okay. And so a court other than us would decide whether substantial work was done or not.
Well, if
you put a $500,000 moniker on that, but a $5,000 effort is probably not considered as substantial.
What would ultimately happen is, and chances are, God willing, I'm still serving this town and its citizens. The question would be if it came down to an opinion of the town that they had lost their vested rights. Notification of that would be sent to the owner, the developer, and they could have their appellate recourse at that point. They could appeal it. They could take it up to the Superior Court, let a judge decide who's right and who's wrong, and from there you can go.
What we can do.
Correct.
Quick question: who from the town gets to decide and say, "Okay, we don't believe you've satisfied your vested rights"?
I believe the UDO administrator would issue an opinion that he would probably work in concert with me on as to whether or not they have lost their rights.
But the planning board or the town council couldn't instruct them to do that based on their review of the developer initiative.
I think that's within the purview of the UDO administrator to make that determination.
Okay.
And that decision would be communicated to the developer, and the developer would have the ability, I believe, going off of memory, to appeal the UDO administrator's decision to the Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
The Board of Adjustment would make its decision. If it affirmed the UDO administrator, it would then go up, if the developer wanted to appeal it to Superior Court. of Brunswick County. And if they didn't like that, or either side didn't like it, you could appeal it to the Court of Appeals in Raleigh and ultimately possibly to the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to entertain a motion that we approve the application of Ocean Ridge Plantation Phase 6, Sections 2D and 3 through 8.
Second motion.
Any discussion?
I would just like to point out, I hope the attendees here have seen the difficult position that we're put in based upon the existing law. Politics is how you make policy. There's an election coming up. The people that you send to North Carolina legislature have opinions about what should change so local communities such as ourselves have a little more leeway in how we can address the legitimate rights of a developer and the legitimate concerns of the community. Because right now, I think what we've seen evidence here is we have very limited tools. So that is my 2 cents. And
Call for a vote on the motion.
Take a roll.
Suggest a roll. Richard?
I don't see how we have any choice. In every fiber of my body, I want to withdraw my assent to this, but given the guidance that Grady has kindly given us, I don't see how we can.
Up or down?
Up.
Record state, Mr. Dysinger was affirmative. Ron?
Aye.
Affirmative for Ron.
Aye.
Aye for Jerry. Aye for me.
Aye.
For Sybil. Okay. Can we take a 15-minute break? Yes.
And I want to.
I'd like to make a motion that we take a 15-minute break
I second it.
and return back at 25 after 11. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, ready? We're back in session with the November 3rd, 2022 regular meeting of the Planning Board for Sunset Beach. The second item under 5 new business is the Pelican Reserve preliminary plat. Chad, do you have an opening statement or any
Yes.
comments, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Riptide Builders, owner and applicant, is requesting preliminary plat approval for Pelican Reserve. This is a preliminary plat for 147 lots. I think that might have changed.
I thought it was 137.
You got 140, you got 147.
Yeah, 147.
Okay.
Yes.
147 lots in the Cetral subdivision. The subject property is located off of Clubhouse Road and Mill Pond Road at the intersection of Clubhouse Road and Mill Pond Road. Subject property is approximately 55.61 acres in size and currently zoned MR3. May be further identified by the Brunswick County parcel number listed there. Staff has reviewed the applicant or reviewed and approved the preliminary plat to be reviewed by the planning board for final approval. Attached to staff's comments and reviewed by the preliminary plat. Prior to issuance of a zoning permit, the preliminary plat must be approved by the planning board in accordance to 13.01. Based on staff review, the proposed site plan meets the standards of the UDO. Please see attached for staff review comments. Again, I am available, town staff, administration, attorneys available. The applicant is here for availability as well.
All right, Chad, thank you. I'll make a note for the record as housekeeping that the same comment I had the previous topic,
Yes.
section 13.02 should be
Yes.
really 13.01.
That's correct.
Because this is a preliminary plat. One of the comments that I had in looking at this initially had to do with the tree line, a new tree line. It shows on Pelican Reserve that the trees would be outboard of the sidewalk. In other words, you'd have the roadway, you'd have a grass strip, you'd have a sidewalk, and then there would be the trees. And I believe in the past, we've had to amend this because of utility easements. Do you have any comments about that?
I do. Yeah. So one fold is that Dustin and I has reviewed this within the past couple days. He is okay with it. The other thing is that I'm sure with the applicant Alan and Todd being here, that they will be under provision and if with working with Brunswick County Utilities to make sure there's no hindrance of any kind with them as well. And I see Todd nodding his head. So yeah, that would be my comment for that.
As just a point, and if the applicant would allow me, we have a subdivision that the applicant has put in called Birdwatch. And I note as I drive, because there happens to be some curves with some sight distance issues. Yep, Todd, if you could introduce yourself and please come up to the.
Hi, Todd Rodemacher, first time, long time. 279 Clubhouse Road, Riptide Builders.
All right, thank you. And I apologize for not having you come up before I started my question. One of the things that I'm always concerned about is sight distances on roadways.
Sure.
And some of the existing subdivisions that you're working on right now, the trees are planted in between the sidewalk and the road, so they're quite close to the road in that 5-foot strip. And but obviously, concern for sight distances, you can't do anything about it right now because the sight distance is not being interfered with because the trees are still juvenile. But once they mature, there's going to be overhanging issues because of their proximity to the actual pavement of the roadway. So I'm just kind of making a comment that needs to be looked at.
Sure. And those trees were planted obviously to meet the site triangles, and they don't even start until the site triangle has ended. So that is taken into consideration. The trees that were also planted, we reviewed with several engineering firms to get to that 6-foot median, and the species that we chose for that area, as we do with all of our trees, depending on where they're located, those specific trees were chosen because their root structures go down and not out, so they won't.
Right.
It will limit the opportunities for damage to the roadways and sidewalk infrastructure.
And you've made that point in the past, and I agree wholeheartedly with it. Another question for the applicant: we're showing, and I'm old and I'm Pond Road. Is it Lily Pond Road?
Mill Pond Road?
Oh, Mill Pond Road. Okay, it was hard for me to read. It seems to progress out to Angels Trace Road. Is that going to be a? Is there going to be a barrier there, or
No,
is
that'll
that
be
really
open
access?
to, that will be open to the public. There is existing, I can say that we own the portions in that area.
In that intersection?
A little bit all the way down the length of our property. We own the 30 feet in that area. And then there is an existing easement
Okay, so
for
you will-
access. There's an access easement to get to the sewer plant. I believe they're the ones who actually put the gate up on that road. So yeah, we will be utilizing Angels Trace Road moving forward.
So you go all the way up to a little beyond Wallace Place Road, which was the subject of a lot of discussion in the prior hearing. It's on Angels Trace.
Not 100% familiar with exactly where Wallace Trace Road is. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
100%.
All right. So in other words, that is going to be, I mean, I'm ecstatic that this development is going to allow for Eastwood Park Road to not be a dead end.
Correct.
The fire engine doesn't want to turn around.
It will take care of many issues beyond the fire department as well.
Okay.
So okay. I see it now.
So there is, even if Angels Trace were to be blocked off, and that was really my question, you would still have two major
Correct.
Egress,
Correct.
Ingress parts there.
Yes, and I would note that there are utilities that were put in eons ago from previous approvals that run from Clubhouse Road all the way up to Angels Trace Road. So that's one of the Angels Trace Road. So that's one of the reasons that main roadway is placed where it is to follow that existing sewer line.
I notice on the end over by Clubhouse Road, you show an amenity. And Chad, when they show an amenity, like I'm looking here at a trellis fire pit amenity area, is that binding on them in this preliminary plat
is
approval
not.
to actually have that amenity there?
So the amenity site will be again approved separately via major site
Right.
development permit that will be brought before this board as a separate case.
And hopefully by then the town will have approved fire pits. So that's
It's on this agenda.
But can we presume that the pool size and what you refer to as the pool house will be of that size?
That a minimum of that size.
Okay.
Could be bigger. Our anticipation is to provide a facility that will be equal or greater to that of the Pink Palace structure.
And that would be open to all Sea
That would be open to all Sea Trail residents.
but Chad, again, this parking area and the pool area and the pool house,
it's not under purview
we're
today.
not taking that into
Correct.
consideration.
That's a separate site
That's
plan
a separate
submittal.
submittal to we can use that as an idea, but
It's really on the site right now as a placeholder, just so you guys were all aware that there is more coming down the road.
The only type of amenity, I wouldn't even consider it really an amenity. It's a requirement that could be under your purview today, kind of like that, would be the location. And again, it meets the definition to the UDO of where the mail kiosk is.
Mailbox.
Yep.
Okay. I had any members of the planning board have specific questions?
It's really more a matter of curiosity. There's a small parking lot across from the Chinaway offices. What is that for?
The mail kiosk parking lot?
So that's the mail.
Mm-hmm.
So these lots will not have home attached mailboxes.
The United States Postal Service, like 5 or 6 years ago,
You'll never see
eliminated
that
that. So
again.
yes.
Okay.
Sybil, do you have
Say
any
no more.
specific comments?
I did not.
Jerry?
The existing cart paths, will you be fixing those as well on this plot plan?
I would assume that there would. I can't guarantee that, but I would assume that there would be some sort of Are you talking about near the road crossing or all of the car paths?
But car paths. But along these two, number 9 on both courses. Show it on the plot plan.
They're on the plan just because that's the existing
for illustration.
Existing holes.
All right, that's all.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk.
Not with this submittal.
Let's talk trees. You've done an excellent job of showcasing where the existing tree line is. What is, in terms of, many of them are heritage trees, what's going to be the outcome in terms of what trees are going to have to be taken out and what trees are going to be preserved?
Well, obviously, once again, that comes down to the individual lot homeowners at the time, but some of that will be determined once we get into the sedimentation erosion control and state stormwater regulations, that we just don't know exactly 100% what they're going to want us to do. Specifically, I can let Alan touch on some of that, give you a little more clarity.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Alan Lewis with East Coast Engineering. There's some new faces that I'm seeing and some ones that I've seen before during previous presentations. Just quickly, a little background about me. I'm used to sitting on both sides of the dais. I served for 18 years on the County Planning Board and 20 years on the Town of Charlotte Planning Board. So I understand, believe me, the difficulties and the challenges that you have sitting on that side of the dais. In regards to the trees, just like what we presented during Gull's Landing, we try our best to save heritage trees whenever we can. Sometimes that's not possible, not only from a standpoint of utilities such as water, sewer, electricity, but also for sedimentation, erosion control, and stormwater. This particular project, you'll notice that there's a pretty large lake in the middle of it.
Right.
That lake was previously permitted years ago to be a stormwater pond, retention pond. So all of our impervious surface has to drain to that pond. Now, how we get it there, whether we pipe it or whether we convey it with open channels or swales, grassline swales, is up to us to determine during the design stage. I'd like to tell you that there would be some percentage of trees that we'll be able to save on the property, but until we get into the actual design, there's not any way for us to report accurately what we're going to be able to salvage and not. But with this developer, I'm pleased that when we have a group that is not only developing the project, but they're also building the homes. So they're also going in there and adding trees back to the lots when they've had to be cut in order to get the ground up to a level to where it'll drain to where it needs to drain. In Birdwatch, for example, we had some lots that were considered low density stormwater where we had grassline swales that traveled at least a distance of 100 feet before they entered a water body, or they were high density lots which they were piped to the retention pond. Now, on this project, it's a little complex because we have water that's coming down from us from upstream areas. The Birdwatch area, the Eastwood Bluffs area, Eastwood Park area drains to a large central stormwater retention pond, and then that pond comes down and empties into this pond. So we have to take that upstream water and we have to route it around this retention pond. Okay? So that's not going to be a very easy feat, but we've been looking at it preliminarily with the elevations that we got from our surveyor, and we know that it can be achieved. One of the things that we're doing also is we're adding some additional water amenities in addition to the main stormwater pond. I think you'll notice that we have a dog park that's planned in the project, where we're going to build a pond, an amenity pond, that's going to help achieve that goal.
And your fishing dock too.
Fishing dock and some amenities and stuff. You'll be amazed at what kind of brim and what kind of freshwater fish that you'll find in these lakes, these ponds. But we're going to do our utmost to try to save as many heritage trees as we can. But I can tell you, if you have to cut or fill more than a foot with these heritage trees, they're going to die over a 2 to 3 year period. So it's best to go ahead and remove them then instead of letting them die and then having take them out at a later date.
And we have your assurance that in this removal process, this will not be a burn in place.
Well, let me say this. There are rules and laws on burning. You cannot burn within 500 feet of a house unless you provide a windscreen. Now, windscreens are very expensive, and it's very seldom that they're used. So in areas that were allowed by the fire marshal and with the fire folks to allow to be burned, there would be some burning that would occur when the site is cleared. Some of that was, well,
This is within our fire district, and our fire
Yeah, this
chief
is
has
inside
the-
Sunset Beach, so there
Yes.
wouldn't be any
Any
burning allowed. Everything would be cut and haul.
Right. The fire chief would make sure that the smoke was not objectionable and would shut it down
right.
immediately, even if a
Well, we-
infrequent permit had been issued.
We endured the burn in the sanctuary, and I'm all the way over in Sugar Sands.
Right.
And it impacted, my wife is an asthmatic, and it impacted her significantly.
And I am too. I understand that.
Okay, great. All right,
Okay,
fantastic.
please. Oh, thank you. I didn't know if you were finished or
No,
not.
if I have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I'll stand here with Todd, but I'm primarily here as the technical person and to answer any of your technical questions.
So let me ask one more question. In terms of this review process, is this something that would come before us as part of the final plat, or you would coordinate with staff in terms of the permission to cut trees?
We go through the same process every time that we work with Chad on every project. And we would follow that same procedure this time as well.
All right, great.
I note that in your review, Chad, of the application under 1301, in the very first one, A, where you talk about the technical review procedure, it appears here that you're working with the applicant to reschedule. In other words, a TRC meeting has not happened yet?
No, it has.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my fault.
Okay.
Yeah, it should have been redlined. Yeah. Hardly anything that comes before you, if it deems required by me to go through TRC, it certainly does go through
So
TRC.
that, in fact, it needs to be amended that a TRC meeting has, in fact, occurred.
Yeah, it has.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So we should mark that.
And a
as
report has been written.
We should mark that as complete.
Yes.
And in addition, just to make sure that the board's comfortable, we've already coordinated with all of these other outside agencies, Brunswick County Engineering. We've coordinated with Demler, with stormwater erosion control folks. We've coordinated with the state for the water and sewer extensions.
My understanding is a good chunk of this was historically part of Sea Trail's plans, and some of it was built before Riptide came on board. Is that
Actually,
correct?
I presented to the planning board back in 2007 a multifamily plan that was approved for this site.
Interesting. Okay.
But that's not in Riptide's plans. They would rather have single family on this property.
And lighting, is that done by Brunswick Electric, or that
Yes.
just follows your?
Brunswick Electric does all of the lighting.
Ron, did you have anything specific?
Nope.
To address here?
Nope. You wanted
Anything
me
else?
down in the first part.
Anything else from the members of the planning board? Sybil?
No.
You finished?
I'm done.
My questions have been answered. Jerry?
I'm good.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chad, do you have anything to add to this discussion?
No, sir.
Anything you
No,
think
sir,
we
sorry.
missed or misunderstood?
Yeah, I mean, I'll point out just briefly. If you go down to the bottom of my review, it says additional notes. All this line through. Please address all comments approved submitted by TRC. Above and submitted by TRC. The only thing that's outstanding is state stormwater permits need to be obtained and updated as applicable, and the amenity site will need to seek approval through major site plan.
All right, we have before us an application of board members on Pelican Reserve preliminary plat that has been identified by Chad in his opening remarks of 147 lots within Sea Trail subdivision. We either have to approve, we have the opportunity to approve with conditions or to deny. What is the pleasure of the board to make a motion?
I would be pleased to make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Any further discussions on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous? Okay. We have now concluded the two new business items under number 5. We now would open up the floor to public comments, and these can be on any subject that would be planning board purview. 3 minutes per speaker, and again, no deliberation with the planning board members. Any comments?
Thank you.
I would suspect that nobody's in that room anymore.
No.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this planning board meeting.
And so there were no one wanted to make follow-up public comments?
Nope,
Okay.
they're ready to
Yeah.
go home. It's been 4 hours.
Ron, you want to make the motion to adjourn?
Sure, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.